Welcome along to the next episode of Heroes and Villains. Delighted to be joined, as usual, by our regular guests. Sarah, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, so hi everybody, I'm Sarah Sweeney Marshall and I'm a sales specialist.
Fantastic. And Precious.
Hi everyone, my name is Precious Zimbi-Kalwanga and I am the self-professed business strategist.
Fantastic. We are delighted to be joined as our special guest this week by Dr. Pat Boulogne. Pat, can you say hi?
I am your token American.
So, whereabouts in the United States are you?
I'm on the East Coast.
Okay, fantastic. So we're not too early for you. Okay, good. Well, you're very welcome to the show, Pat. We're really intrigued to see what you or hear what you have to say a little bit later on. And I'm Keith Roselle. I'm a sales professional too. And let's crack on now. We talked about this beforehand. The format of the show, as you probably know by now, is we're going to talk about heroes and villains, generally emerging from the pandemic. Great behaviours, not so great behaviours. And today we're going to be led by Sarah. So Sarah, can I hand over to you, please?
Of course, yeah. So today I want to discuss the topic of bullying in the workplace. So ACAS receives over 20,000 calls a year from employees with bullying claims. And that equates to about 23% of the British workforce that are bullied each year, which is a huge number, really. So it brings me on to wanting to discuss Priti Patel and Boris Johnson, so the alleged bully claims and kind of what happened and how it was handled. So there was an inquiry concluded that Priti Patel had broke the ministerial code of conduct. However, it was reported that Boris ignored the findings and ruled she didn't break the code. So as a result, she didn't lose her position. So the allegations were raised after the former Home Office secretary described a vicious campaign against him for challenging the alleged mistreatment of civil servants. So kind of that's what happened. So the report conducted that actually there was evidence and findings to show that a behaviour didn't consistently meet the high standards that were required. And it was made, I've just got some notes here, it was also stated that our approach on occasions can be described as bullying in terms of how it made the individuals feel. So based on that, so when you feel bullied, that can be a huge thing. It impacts your well-being, it impacts your state of mind, it'll also impact your performance and productivity within the workplace as well. So if there's been a thorough inquiry made and points there to prove that she didn't behave correctly, was the decision that Boris took the correct thing to not remove her from her current position? The flip side of that, you could argue, was did these individuals maybe feel bullied because pressure was applied? Was she doing her job properly? Was she performance managing? Was she following the right capability or disciplinary procedures? That's not available in the report. It's very kind of secretive on what's being disclosed. So based on what's been published, my opinion is that she probably should have stepped away from her position. However, I can't really make an informed decision because we can't see the whole factual information that sits with that report either.
That's great. That's a great shout. Who wants to come in first on that? Yeah, Precious.
Yeah, no, I'll come in. I think I think the bullying as an issue is a serious issue to take in any organization. So, like you say, Sarah, without us actually knowing the backstory of actually what happened and the delivery and whether or not they were actually conversations that were aligned to HR policy and everything else within the Home Office is another thing. In any situation where there's bullying, people should be made accountable for it. But in leadership positions, sometimes there is that thin line where you are having to exercise not authority, but you're having to exercise your leadership to your team. And if you don't have the right communication skills, or you don't have that process followed, you can easily fall into that pile of being quite a bullish or a bullying leader. So without knowing the facts about it, it's very difficult to say. But if she was truly a bully and she made people feel uncomfortable in their roles and made people feel vulnerable in their roles, because bullies make people feel vulnerable, then absolutely she should be taking accountability for that. And Boris Johnson, like a leader, he is the leader of the government and she's his employee in essence, should be taking the steps, again aligned with HR policy, to ensure that effective action is taken. So that's my take on that. Bullying is unacceptable.
Yeah. What's interesting is she's already had a bullying case taken against her. So somebody in the DWP actually, I think they were awarded £25,000 due to a bullying claim. So there's behaviours obviously that have been present before. So is it right to then let that trait or let that continue? I'm not sure it is.
Sounds like Priti needs some leadership training.
Well, so that is a good shout. There's no place for bullying and many other poor behaviours in the workplace. And Parliament is a workplace in the same way that yours and my offices, wherever we're working from at the moment, is a workplace. And it's not, so she's got form. When I was talking to a couple of friends, when I knew you were going to talk about this, so I talked to a couple of my friends who've worked in Whitehall, and one of them said they knew of another MP that got so frustrated at some civil servants that she grabbed a heavy glass ashtray and threw it across the room. And the person fortunately ducked, and it smashed the window, and ended out on the Whitehall pavement below. And so my point is, there is no excuse for this happens all the time. I know that we're working in a heightened state of anxiety, particularly when it comes to proximity of people. But so that's poor behaviour, but it could have been arrested by her manager, should we say, Boris, at this point, taking a leadership position, as you say, and saying, look, she's trying to do the right thing in the wrong way, maybe should have been some sanction. But it seems as though Boris has this amazing loyalty with his lieutenants to grab Cummings, Priti Patel. There will be others as well. So I don't want to hold this conversation, but there's something really interesting going on in Whitehall where nothing is a resigning offence, it seems. Dr. Pat, can I bring you in on this?
Well, I have a couple comments, because when we were first, I know some things about this, but I know things about bullying. And one thing is a leopard doesn't change his spots. So, and a leader speaks with clarity and speaks with confidence and supports her staff or supports the people around them so that they can go from one point to the other point and have the freedom to be able to speak an objection or to be able to have an exchange. So when someone's in the position of bullying, it says more about the bullier than it does about the person who's being bullied. And she certainly clearly, with the ashtray thing, it's just like she needs anger management. She's in job. If she's dealing with people, and you're going to deal with people. Based upon what I hear, what you all say, and the brief things that I've read, is this, she needs anger management. She needs to be, she needs to help. And what that core problem is, and not keep on treating or pacifying or putting the Band-Aid on the branches.
It's a very
that's my take on that.
That's a really good take, and I feel sure that our own Parliament isn't unique in that. There's got to be other places around the world where this is allowed to go on, but it has to be stamped out. And leadership, I think, is part of management, and that's part of like it or not. It's one of those. Boris loves to be popular, unfortunately. Doesn't in those courageous conversations. So great great opening gambit on bullying and Priti Patel there with Sarah. Now, as we went through the order, I'm up next. So if you'll forgive me, I'll launch into my sort of chosen subjects today, and I'm going to talk about the recent Sainsburys ad. Now, they're a trio of ads recently. I want to talk about one in particular. Now, Dr. Pat, in this country, and I'm sure the same is true in the United States, all the big supermarkets release their respective ads for the Christmas or holidays campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And they're normally hotly awaited, a bit like the Super Bowl. They're normally hotly awaited events to see who's got the best Christmas ad. And this year, Sainsbury's ran a particular ad which featured a black family, the father and his daughter talking over the phone, and the dad proudly boasting that he made the best turkey gravy. Absolutely unequivocally, his was the best gravy. Okay, so however, the ad prompted a racist backlash by a small but a very vocal part of I hesitate to say community, but that community anyway. And some commented that they'll be boycotting Sainsburys. So to demonstrate a united front against that faction, all the big supermarkets, that's Aldi, Asda, Co-op, Iceland, Lidl, Marks and Spencer, Sainsbury's, Tesco and Waitrose, they're all in alphabetical order so as not to promote favoritism. But anyway, they aired their ads on Channel 4 back to back, along with the hashtag Stand Against Racism. And normally that's a big deal. Normally supermarkets avoid putting their ads so closely together against the competitors because it dilutes, pressures. You're in marketing, you'll understand there'll be a dilutory effect on their messaging there. So I thought it was really courageous to almost change their approach in light of this united approach on racism. So I was thrilled to see that behaviour. So my hero is Sainsbury's, really, for putting the ad on in the first place, and then the retailers coming together for the common good in taking a stand against racism. So that's my heroic behavior. And set against that, we have a villainous side, if you like. And a villainous side. So Arcadia Group. Now, Arcadia Group is a big retail consortium, perhaps like well, not quite as upscale as Neiman Marcus, but you get it. Run by well, he hasn't really had much to do with them legally or formally for about 10 years. But anyway, Philip Green, most people have heard of him, is Arcadia Fashion Empire, has just become the highest profile victim of the coronavirus pandemic, fell into administration, and 13,000 jobs are now at risk. So our thoughts are obviously with the employees and their families affected. It's a really tough time of year to be faced with that. Arcadia comprises of some really big brands, Topshop, Burton, Evans and Wallace, and it's also the leading concession in Debenhams. And let's put that group into administration as of earlier today as well. So Arcadia was in trouble even before the pandemic. It lost 30% market share over a number of years to the likes of Next, Primark, H&M, and it was expecting to make £80 million in profits up until September, so only a couple of months ago. So it's curious to me that it's fallen into administration so shortly afterwards. Could this be an area worth looking into? Ian Grabiner, the current group CEO, has run Arcadia for the last 10 years. He's been a close colleague of Philip Green since the 1980s. And listeners may recall that Philip Green has an interesting history when it comes to profits, tax, and corporate pension payments. In fact, he's reported in the FT as having made the fastest £1 billion in history in the early 2000s. So UK Business Secretary Alex Sharma has promised to keep a close eye on the insolvency process, and he's expecting a report from Deloitte on directors' behaviour in the next couple or so of months. Also, Mike Ashley and Mahmoud Kamani are both thought to be circling the assets to be likely bidders for that business, and both of those personalities have featured on recent episodes of this podcast. So I fear for members of the pension scheme and the taxpayer as well, who will ultimately end up footing the bill. And I hope there's no evidence of malfeasance here, but as Warren Buffett says, there's really only one cockroach in the kitchen. So that's my villain. Who wants to go first? Precious. Big smile.
Always off the block, sorry.
Oh, okay. You want, not at all. Do you want me to go to Sarah? I'll go to Sarah while you.
Go with Sarah. Go with Sarah.
I think you've chose two really, really strong subjects. The Sainsburys advert, the comments and the backlash that came off that, with people saying they couldn't relate to the family. It was disgusting. How can you not relate to somebody sitting around a table having Christmas dinner or making gravy? And I mean, to be fair, the gravy looks delicious on the advert. I'd be claiming that I've got the best gravy as well. So that was really shocking. But you're right, it was really, really great to see the other big brands take a united front against it. They created their own hashtag as well, didn't they? Stand Against Racism, which was really, really great to see. There should be. But we're in a day and age now where there's no room for racism, and to see it still exists to such an extent as well is appalling, really. With the Arcadia group, so the main thing from that is the people's pensions massively up at risk, so into the value of £350 million worth of pension pot. Where people have worked there, are entitled to it, so they might lose their pensions. And I think it was bad taste as well when he's currently, well, or was, when he made a statement sitting in his £1 million yacht in the middle of Monaco, appealing to his staff, which I thought was quite bad taste. So yeah, not ideal. My heart goes out because I've been made redundant myself this year, so I know what that's like. But especially this close to Christmas and being at risk of losing your pensions and things as well, it's not great.
Well put. Dr. Pat. Oh, I think you're on mute, Dr. Pat. So there we go. There we go. You're all set.
I put it on mute because I wanted to take a quick look at that video of Salisbury, which I couldn't really find on this side here. I found the one from 18, 17, 16, but there is not one my Google search for 2020. So, but what I know is what people focus on is more of what they get. So if you focus on the glass being full, the glass is full. If you focus and you see things around you that represent and reflect that and that resonate with that. And when you focus on things that are half full or empty, you get more of that same influx of things. So racism, it's in the United States, that we have a ton of cities that governors and, statespeople did nothing about really monitoring them burning down and destroying a lot of different places. And in a reaction to things that started to happen from a Black man's death in Minneapolis. And it's just, so when I look around at that, I even look around at that advert, because there's nothing wrong with somebody making the best gravy. I mean, and that messaging, what was wrong is what color of person that they chose to use in the advert, which represented to some people being racist. I think being a is and being happy is a choice, and seeing the good in people is a choice. And when there's no distinction in color. My parents grew up in that way, but I did not grow up in that way. And, and I have many friends of different, what I call flavor, and I've had many patients who, we would have really good conversations. And it's just, I personally do not think in those terms, so it always blows me away when somebody is, when they're starting to label, because Wayne Dwyer used to say, whatever you focus on is what you get. And he also said something, it's like when you're looking at somebody else and you're finding faults, those are faults you have within yourself. And you have to, and people don't feel, I think people feel supported, and I don't feel that they feel accountable. And when they're held accountable, they don't feel support. So that's,
that's a great,
just an opinion.
Well, that's why you're here, Dr. Pat. That's why you're here.
Thanks.
So Precious, I've got
Yeah.
you want to say something about that, please?
Absolutely. I call 2020 the year of the stand. People have been making a stand in many ways. For me, Sainsburys was refreshing. It was absolutely refreshing. Sainsburys is a brand that's it's socioeconomically, a lot of people that would go to Sainsburys are a certain demographic. So for me, it made a stand as a supermarket that, we will welcome a diverse footfall in our stores. And that was profound for me. And they've made 3 ads. They've made 3 ads in succession. And they actually show the demographic that goes into Sainsburys. You don't walk into Sainsburys and you see one race. You walk into Sainsburys and you see a multitude of races. And for me, them starting with a Black family in the current climate was a bold statement, a very, very bold statement to say, as a business, we actually do stand against race. And if we do lose the demographic that doesn't want to buy in our stores, we're happy to make a loss in that. We're happy to lose those customers. Profound statement for me. Very, very profound. So, ratings within the Black community went up really, really high with Sainsburys. It was almost like, well, the first ad was that, but actually it's not really about the race thing. It's about them making a stand as an organization for me. Arcadia Group, Philip Green, okay, we're not going to talk about Mike Ashley because I think, but there's similarities in the way that they run their organizations in my viewpoint. There's an element of, I'll line my pockets, I have staff, I have employees. People are out of jobs. People are at risk with their jobs. Sarah, you touched on it really well. It's Christmas. It's the worst time to be made redundant. It's the worst time to have your pension potentially at risk. It's the worst time to have such uncertainty in COVID, during COVID, where you think the next day I can't even get another job because the economy is not even sustaining people jumping into new jobs. So for me, making an announcement on a yacht in Monaco, very tasteless. Also as well, the fact that I know that every organization is under pressure at the moment, especially retail. So maybe is it opportune to go down now because it is the story of the day, or could you actually save your organization? I don't know. The jury's out on that one.
Yeah, you're right, and that's a massive subject. We could spend a lot of time on the emotional economics of when to bid for an organization, and maybe we'll put that a later show. But it's one of those occasions where a race to the bottom may actually be in the bidder's interests. And so again, big subject, but really well put, Precious. Thank you very much. So speaking of Precious, it's time for your pitch, so to speak, Precious. So what are you going to talk about today?
So I'm going to carry on from my last conversation in the previous podcast, where we talked about test and trace. I talked about test and trace. Today I'm talking about the vaccine. We're testing, we're tracing. Now we're trying to, contain this virus. The vaccine for me and the process is both going to be my hero and villain today. So the heroic act with the vaccine is pretty obvious. We're going to have the management of the pandemic if the vaccine is actually effective. Everybody wants to go back to normal in some shape or form. If we have an effective vaccine, our economies globally will start to thrive or pick up. There's talk about it being out by the second quarter. It should be under control. So it's a hero in that aspect. Socioeconomic benefits are numerous. Villainous for me is, and I keep talking about the UK government, and you've got to forgive me, but sometimes you just can't help it. The communication is poor again from the government. is there a hidden agenda? You know, I've never known. I mean, I'm not a scientist in any shape or form, but you look at history says, you know, vaccines are not created overnight. They're not created in 6 months. They're created over years of trials and tests and everything. I just feel we are in it. It just feels too quick. It feels very reactive. There've been a lot of issues in terms of the way it's been managed. COVID has been managed. I'll speak only for the United Kingdom, but globally as well, there are issues. But within the United Kingdom, I think there's been issues. There's been different views from different countries within the United Kingdom. Scotland doing its own thing, Northern Ireland doing its own thing, Wales doing its own thing, England doing its own thing. Very, very reactive in my mind in the way that they're dealing with this COVID vaccine. So there are over 20 drug companies on the race to get this vaccine out. In the UK, we've got Pfizer, AstraZeneca, working in conjunction with Oxford, GSK, etc., etc. I want to talk about GSK a little bit. GSK, Sir Patrick Vallance, former president of research and R&D at GSK, is actually the chief scientific advisor for the vaccine. You know, how are we going to procure? Who's going to get the contracts for the vaccine? It's being run by a president for R&D, previous president for R&D at GSK. GSK is one of the companies that are actually putting a bid for vaccines at the moment. Conflict of interest, it was touched on in the Telegraph, it was touched on in the Daily Mail. There was a conversation, an interview with Matt Hancock. I could talk about Matt Hancock for days. Matt Hancock said that was the first time that he had heard about this conflict of interest. Health minister is not aware that the chief scientific advisor potentially still has £600,000 worth of shares that will only mature in 2021. And he's the scientific advisor. Leave that one for the jury as well. So my issue, back to the vaccine in terms of its villainous act, is the fact that, you know, at the moment, there was a report that went out. We're trying to get this vaccine out because numbers are increasing. COVID numbers are increasing. We've just had a report that the numbers have reduced by a third. Actually, our numbers are far lower than they were in the first wave of the pandemic. There's less people on oxygen. There's less people reliant on ventilation. There's half the number of beds than there were in the first wave. Why are we rushing? Why are we rushing if we're actually in control? Don't get me wrong, we need a vaccine. But then there's also the case of the vaccine passport, which was, you know, going around at the moment saying big venues are not going to allow people to come in if they cannot demonstrate that they've had a vaccine. I have an issue with that, especially as a pessimist. I'm not going to have the drug companies coming after me, but a drug test that's gone on for less than a year, I'm a bit of a pessimist of having that vaccine in my system. But there you go. So for me, the vaccine's rushed, in my view. I think there's a hidden agenda. I think I'm calling it a chamocracy at the moment. The same group of people are getting their pockets lined. I've talked about Sir Patrick Vallance. He's going to have his pocket lined if GSK get the deal for some of the vaccines in the UK. He'll get a nice tidy sum from his shares. And, you know, I just, that's where I'm at. I just think that it's a bit rushed.
Okay, got that. Now, Dr. Pat, given you're the closest we have to medical team on the podcast, I wonder if you've got anything to say about vaccine and what Precious had to say around all of this, because this is one subject that unites. We're all kind of exposed to, right?
Well, what you have to remember about Big Pharma is that Big Pharma is the good old boys club. And so there's a lot of people, there have been people in the United States that have held prominent positions. Like if you look at the example of NutraSweet, when NutraSweet first was being pushed through the FDA, the person who was pushing it through the FDA after he left the FDA became president of a team in NutraSweet. And so was there a conflict of interest? Was it being pushed too soon? We all know that NutraSweet is very induces a lot of chronic illnesses and diseases, like ALS, that they're, and, multiple sclerosis. They know that there's some level of direct tie to chronic illness and disease from drinking that horrible substance, aspartame. So when you look at, the theory of vaccines, I am not opposed to. What's in the vaccine, I'm opposed to, because a lot of times there's heavy metals, because you have to have the heavy metals used as a anchor to bring the vaccine through the gut lining into the body. Heavy metals are toxic for us. We all have some level of toxicity from heavy metals. And so when you're looking at that, I'm going, God, she says the word hidden agenda, it's just like that's synonymous for me with big pharma, because big pharma's profits before COVID hit were all dumping because people were doing alternative things as opposed to relying on big pharma type drugs. And, Dr. Mayo years ago said one drug is a godsend. Do we ever need some of those drugs, but do we need them forever? And the vaccine, if you ever took, when you go and get a vaccine, you should demand, not ask for the summary sheet. You want the insert that's inside. Some of these inserts are about 3 feet long. It makes for a long reading. And some of the ingredients, you got to look up what some of the ingredients that are in there, because, they're going to end up doing more harm than good, and I'm going to bring up a point up when I get my opportunity here, for this. But and when you're looking at people who have an interest like, Warren Buffett, and people like that, if you're looking at where they claim they're putting their money at, now they're all putting them back into the vaccine companies.
Yeah.
And they sit on boards. So, you've got to wonder how that, how the pieces of that puzzle really fit in, because what they have the media, paint for you is not necessarily the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help them God. And it's a lot of it is on their personal agenda.
That's a really great point, and we don't want to take any thunder away from your slot, Nick. So I'm going to hand over, if I can, to Precious. Come in on that. What?
I've already done my pitch there. I've actually just done my pitch.
That could be so awkward.
It's your turn, Sarah.
I think we need Sarah. We need Sarah to give some input. Keith, where are you today?
Yeah, okay, Sarah, I obviously need more coffee. I'm going with coffee.
I'm making him nervous.
Right now. So I'm so sorry about that. Please.
No, that's fine. I could add something else to it, by the way, and just say it'll be interesting to look at the COVID-19 Act on indemnity of pharma companies on the vaccine. I'm going to leave it at that,
All right.
Just catching up on what Patricia said about, the insert. Yeah.
I think you've both made some incredible points. When it comes to vaccines, I suppose I'm a little bit naive. I've never thought about what's in the vaccine. I kind of just put my trust into the people who say that's what you need and have it. And I've never really kind of looked at or thought of it in any other way. So that's some food for thought for me to take away and kind of look at that maybe a little bit differently. When it comes to the whole GSK scheme, I didn't know anything about that either, Precious. So I think for Hancock to say that he didn't know there was a conflict of interest when somebody's sitting there with £600,000 worth of shares, how can you not know about that? So yeah, that's an eye opener. So somebody's going to make a nice healthy profit out of vaccinating the United Kingdom. So that was certainly an eye opener. When it comes to the speed of it, I suppose there's an argument that does it need to be done quick because of the severity of what has happened, or like you say, because we do seem to be in a bit more control of it now. Are we able to then take our time a little bit more, do some more trials, and get a different outcome? Maybe I don't know. To things like that are beyond me. But yeah, I think there's an argument for a little bit of both. Is it too fast, or is there a need for it to be urgent? With the vaccine passports, I get that to some extent. Not if you're going to go into kind of like a cinema or a large venue and things like that, but certainly for traveling. I know for certain vaccines like yellow fever, if you were going somewhere that you needed to have your yellow fever vaccine, they wouldn't let you in without having proof that you've had that vaccine. So I think there's certainly a need for it in some circumstances. Certainly, especially when the vaccine is not going to be 100% effective, there's still going to be risk of being able to take that and transmit it to other places. So I think it needs to have some control and measures in there. But what that looks like, I've got no idea.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, do you know something? Had it not have been for Dr. Pat and Precious making those points, I would have, well, probably similar to Sarah, I would have just sleepwalked into my GP surgery and taken my vaccine like the good patient that I am. And I think, taking my medicine, so to speak, without actually thinking about it. The conflicts of interest, I'm gonna spontaneously combust if I think about that too much. But I have to say that is a part. That's just the way of the world sometimes. Actually, much of the time at that level, politics and business and the military are almost as one. I'm getting away from the point, but I will look further into the vaccine. I really like the conflicts of interest that's come out of that. Is it too fast? I do feel very, having four younger ones, mainly university age or slightly older, their lives have been really curtailed by them. And I get that the way that the vaccine is going to be rolled out is going to be given to the most vulnerable first. I also wonder in what way is the younger population is this making them more vulnerable or scarring their life, their life prospects, if you like, by way of keeping them in some enforced variants of lockdown. So I think there are real questions to ask and be answered. So thank you for raising those. Okay, right. So we've talked about that, and that's going to be an interesting sum up I have to try and get to in a second. Loads came out there. Thank you, Precious, for that. We are going to segue nicely, I think, onto Dr. Pat. And so, Dr. Pat, if I can hand over to you for your 3 to 4 minutes on what's exercising you at the minute.
Well, there's numerous things, but and from this conversation, my villain kind of semi-changed, but it's because it's the underlying force, it's the foundation. Because when COVID first came out, you had this Gates was talking here, Gates was talking there. He said this, he said that, and he was acting as if he was an authority. He's not a medical expert. He's never done the research. He just happens to have a lot of money, and there's a lot of money in his foundation. He's a billionaire. He has funded BBC, ABC, all major media. And the problem with major media is that I see, and from when I watch people watch like media like that, is that they fearmonger. How they say what they say is not as important as how they deliver it. So when someone gets off listening to them, that level of fear, which people seem to like these days, is huge. And, and it's just like, and if you try to offer someone hope, or, hey, when you're looking at the numbers, don't look at the numbers of deaths. And I was, and something that just crossed my mind, which I don't know the exact answer to, is what defines a pandemic? How many people define a pandemic? And when are you out of a pandemic? And there's a problem in the villain too, in this whole thing, is that how they count numbers. For quite a while in the United States, anybody who died within 30 days of COVID was considered a COVID death. The problem is that COVID is not a disease; it's a virus. Mm-hmm. What happens is when someone's immune system is suppressed, or they have something that's lurking below the surface, which people usually have lurking below the surface, because when you turn 40, 50, those things start to surface up, and you're thinking like, oh, all that, what about my lifestyle that I did or didn't do contributed to the expression of that level of health then. So when, because I look around, I see way too many people who are sick and don't know it. So if you knew where to focus your health and like, what can I do to support my immune system, then more than likely you would be able to fight off almost anything and let your body, like express that level of health. So are you sick because you're sneezing doesn't necessarily mean you're sick. Are you sick because you're throwing up doesn't mean you're necessarily sick. Maybe you're getting rid of poisons out of your body. And so and looking at like what makes sense to me and what's a simpler pathway and what is a better way to go is to really focus on your immune system and focus on where your weak link is in your health, identify it, and then fortify it. So there's many things that happen, in the United States, and like people, with Dr. Fossey and his, he used to sit on the board for the Gates Foundation, and he was like, really good buddies with, and went to school with, my understanding, with the guy who's the head of the WHO, and also in the CDC. His intimate relationship with these people, and puts him for me at like, prove what you're saying is true. The problem in science is that many scientists work for companies, and they are, if you read the book from Judy Makovich called Plague of Corruption, you kind of understand how science gets their beta studies and how they go through class C or class D or class B and what makes it go to market and what gets hidden underneath the carpet. Yeah. And so if you're looking at people when they were counting numbers for AIDS, they didn't say that person died of AIDS, but they died of a underlying problem that surfaced and that type of thing. So it's and are we coming out so soon with a vaccine that's not tested? Vaccines only will target COVID-19. It's not going to target any other COVID. And COVID's been around since the 1960s. So the efficacy of, of a drug company, wanting to put something out, it's just like, but first they have everyone so scared and so paralyzed in their will that they're going, I want anything. I'll take, it's like, give it to me. And it will be like, I was once in Moscow at a supermarket, and it was like, I stood up at a distance and I watched people, trying to get the last piece of meat. And that's what that reminds me of, is that mentality. It reminds me of that mob mentality, like, hey, we got to go get that. So people don't think, like in the bigger plan, they're really focused on that really concentric part of like, I've got to protect me and I've got to protect my family. But when we heal ourselves and we heal ourselves, we heal those behind us, those before us, and those around us. And that's a pandemic and community that I think is the hero to really prosper and focus on, and there's things that also that I was writing down keywords here, when you're looking at, there's so many people who have hidden agendas. I was once in the Capitol and on a private tour and looking at and meeting people, all the way. Somebody said, hey, do you want to get into Nancy Pelosi's office? I can get you in there. And I said, no, thank you. But what was interesting is what, is what the gentleman who was a congressman who was showing my friend and I around. And he said, he goes, we're all one government here. And he goes, we work and function with bipartisan. It looks like that to the outside, but that's not what happens on the inside. And so it's, it's how, and what's really insidious to me are the lobbyists in the United States, because a lot of the congressmen and senators, palms are greased. Yeah. So they vote in a particular way, whichever something's on, and then, or if they tag on an additional agenda and verbiage on a statute that they want to push through for vaccines and for that type of thing. So it's just really scary to me that people like, Gates and Fossey, and, the CDC, who changes their mind on a regular basis, about things, has so much control over people, and people don't see the level of confusion that they're in. So they can't make sense of it. They can't make very educated decisions, because even the information that's out there is iffy, so you have to really say, does this make sense to me? And if it doesn't make sense to you, do better research and then find people that can answer that question.
Great points. Thank you very much. That you just reminded me about herd immunity and recognizing what herd we need immunizing from. You know, do we want? Sarah, it looked like you wanted to come in there.
No, mind completely blown.
Right.
Yeah, your perception and your perspective is completely different to mine. And when somebody like you're talking so passionately and so educated about something, it completely overwhelmed by it, I suppose. The links that you made, I suppose, with the media is what I could relate to the most. So kind of scaremongering and the media and focusing on the negative things and putting that fear into people to create that need and that want is what you see all the time, and it's what you've seen throughout the whole pandemic, to the point where sometimes I would stop reading the papers or watching the news because it just pulls you in, it sucks you in, and it takes a hold. So for me, that's what I could relate to the most of it within that.
Fantastic. Precious.
Right. So for me, it's quite a passionate subject. So Pat, we're together on that. You know, when you started talking about Bill Gates, you're right. Somebody who's not of medical background, who's very, very invested in vaccines, who's very, very invested in virus control, whatever it is, whether or not it's for the right reasons. That one, again, we could have a debate. I have my view, which is pretty much aligned to yours, I think, Pat. But for me, I think it's the same thing, even with the vaccines in the UK. I mean, a lot of mathematicians have been involved in it. Why? Why do we have mathematicians involved in vaccine, you know, in vaccine trials and everything else? You know, it just feels like the wrong people are the ones that are being involved in something that's so critical as creating vaccines, you know. So it's just, yeah.
Okay.
If I can interject something, Bill Gates stated on a video that I watched him on one time in recent, that he estimated that there was going to be 700,000 accidents in the delivery of the vaccine, that's what they expect. It's more, it's like, what?
Yeah, mathematicians.
I said, oh my God. I said, how do you, like, A, how do you know that? And B, if that's your expectation, that's huge number compared to people who either, you know, have the virus. And just because you have the virus doesn't mean that you're going to manifest it internally.
Yeah.
I mean, but go ahead. I'm sorry, but I wanted to put the 700,000 out there because he did say that, quote unquote.
Yeah, sure. Well, I know enough to be dangerous, and I'm happy to be shouted down. At some level, all the answers in the world come down to numbers. And now I'm happy to get involved in a debate on that. But so I sort of get why mathematicians could come in handy at some point, but nothing beats the cure, and that is the science. That is not maths. It's in the execution and the probability and the statistics or scenario planning of this, that, and the other. But at some stage, be it raising capital on the markets or health economics, which I think we're wandering on towards, math comes into, which is why Precious, we've seen Lancaster University invest so much in the Health Innovation Campus and the mathematics that's being done at that point, I have a feeling. So
I think it's to support, though. It's to support. I think there's a lack of, when I say diversity, not in ethnicity, but diversity in capability in the panels. Absolutely, the mathematicians are required, but I mean, I'll share this report that I saw that is skewed. It's skewed at the moment to mathematicians because the probability number is very important to get it out. The probability number is very, very important at this time.
Sure. I also heard, you know, you can get 3 economists in a room and get 4 different opinions.
Right.
It's, that's another kind of number. Does anyone else want to leap in on with what Dr. Pat was talking about, including Dr. Pat, if you otherwise I'll start summing up because I recognise time's pressing on. So if I may, we started off the podcast with Sarah bullying in the workplace and Priti Patel and form in that area, and actually maybe not an isolated minister or an isolated member of government behaving in that way. Disappointment at the way Boris expresses loyalty, if you like. That's one thing we can say about Boris, but perhaps shying away from unpopular decisions, however wrong or right they might be. And now Dr. Pat also talked about a leopard doesn't change its spot. Brilliant. I love that expression. Haven't used it for a while now, but I couldn't agree more. We moved on to my part. I talked about the Sainsburys ad and how frankly empowering it was to see a black family being represented, and that's part of the demographic I believe, or part of the population I believe I'm a member of. It was great to see supermarkets uniting together against one single cause. That was fantastic behaviour. Want to see more of that, please. Sarah talked about no room for racism, and I love that soundbite. On the villainous side, I went for Arcadia, and Sarah actually talked about the £350 million pension pot. I didn't know the number, but that was the number. And Dr. Pat talked about what you focus on is what you get more of. And I hope I noted that down correctly. I liked that. You also talked about waned wire, was it, and labelling. I may have. I think I'm going to do some more research after the podcast on that. And precious, that may well become the title of this particular podcast, which is 2020 being the year of the stand. So I hope you'll be okay. I'm asking permission to use that going forward. Fantastic. Precious's point, we talked about vaccine, both being both hero and villain, and the socioeconomics, back to economics again, socioeconomics related to that. Dr. Pat talked about the old boys club when it comes to conflicts of interest, and say that's an expression we have in the UK. I feel sure it translates across the pond too. Poor, we talked about the villainous side, which is poor communications, and has the why the rush, why the speed of rolling this out, since the numbers are markedly down based on lockdown 1, and an inconsistent approach to communications as well. Conflicts of interest, Sir Patrick Vallance appearing as former president of R&D, Matt Hancock. I must just say this, by the way, there was a fantastic comedy show a long time ago called Hancock's Half Hour. Tony Hancock, you must Google it, because there's one in there about the blood donor, and I encourage anyone to Google that and listen to it. It's just the most hilarious thing about how much blood he has to give. I encourage you, and it just came to mind as I was thinking, but what can you do? So it did seem to also, I wrote down but didn't say out loud, that the whole pharma vaccine thing reminds me of the oxymoron of calling military armors defense companies, military companies being defense. There is a similar dynamic going on there, I thought. And then Dr. Pat, our special guest, talks about Bill Gates. Of course, most of us actually, frankly, hold in high affection, particularly if you come from a technology background, as I have, and services. But of course, what does he know about medicine? I'm sure he's got great advisors, but he's not schooled in medicine. One of the most famous dropouts ever, if I recall correctly. And also, what defines a pandemic? And how do we know when the pandemic is over? That's a really great point to ask. You talked about Dr. Fauci, or Dr. Fauci, however it's proposed, and the closeness, or the chumocracy, which I think it was Precious mentioned there earlier, we've talked about, and a fantastic book, which I'm now going to go out and look, called The Plague of Corruption, which is Judith. Anyway, thank you. Yes. Thank you. That person there, right? So anyway, brilliant. So I really hope you've enjoyed listening, watching to this episode, episode 4, with my guest, Dr. Pat Boulogne, from the East Coast of the United States, with Sarah Sweeney Marshall, with Precious and Bika Lawanga, and me, Keith Roselle. And we really look forward to seeing you again for episode 5.